Hi, I'm Lucas, and today I'm presenting our paper, How Gamification Affects Software Developers, Cautionary Evidence from a Natural Experiment on GitHub, written together with Marcus and Johannes. We studied the effects of gamification on software developers, and the term gamification refers to elements on online platforms like badges, achievements, or leaderboards that reward certain kinds of user behavior. Platform designers often try to steer users to specific activities using gamification. And on software engineering platforms, gamification is quite common. You might be familiar with GitHub's contribution calendar, badges on NPN repos, Stack Overflow reputation points, or Atlassian badges. But the question is, do these work? And if so, how do they affect behavior? Are there any pitfalls? Past work shows that gamification does indeed influence user behavior. For example, that users go out of their way to get badges on Stack Overflow, and that users chase personal bests and round number goals. We also know that badges are used to signal quality and trust, and that users are evaluated, even professionally, by their points and badges. And here we ask, are there downsides? Does gamification lead us to overwork, to chase signals, or to imitate one another? And we explore these issues by exploiting a design change on GitHub. Prior to June 2016, the GitHub activity calendar included counters of user streaks, so days of uninterrupted activity on GitHub. For example, this user here had an ongoing streak of 4 days and an all-time record streak of 121 days. GitHub removed these counters without warning in June 2016. Users had mixed feelings about this change. For example, one was saying, "I'm incredibly disappointed in GitHub making this decision. I used it to encourage me to write code every day as a hobby." Others reflected in different ways. For example, one was responding, "With a streak of 640 days, wouldn't you think it's time for a few days off?" For us researchers, this is a natural experiment, an opportunity to compare the behavior of users across the design change to better understand the effects of gamification on software developers. In order to investigate the effects of a design change, we generated a historical streak database using the data from the GHTorrent project. The details are in the paper, but we carefully geolocated and inferred the users' time zones, removed bots and people who clearly edited their commit histories retroactively, and this was resulting in a database of nearly 500,000 developers and a few 100 million contributions. The data and replication materials are available on GitHub. Today I will just highlight a few of our results, but the first and main question is, did developers streak because of the counters? This plot illustrates the daily share of users with an ongoing streak of at least 20, 60 or 200 days respectively. Even though active streaks dropped during the holidays and major GitHub outages, we observe an especially sharp drop in streaking right after the change. So many developers abandoned their streaks when the streak feature was removed. In another plot, we illustrate the share of streaks which survived at least X days. And here each line represents streaks which started in the same week. 10 blue lines represent streaks which started in the first 10 weeks of 2016, so before the design change happened. 10 red lines represent streaks which started 1 year later in the first 10 weeks of 2017. So after the design change took place. And we see a clear separation of both groups of lines and lower survival rates for the red lines after the design change. This suggests that long streaks became less common after the change. So users changed their streaking behavior after the design change. This leads us to the second question, did the streak feature affect the timing of contributions? In order to maintain a quite long streak, users need to make contributions on weekends. Here, we visualize the share of activity on weekends, week by week. After the streak counters were removed, we observe a small but statistically significant drop in the share of activity taking place on the weekends. In the paper, you can find a regression discontinuity model confirming the robustness of this change. This plot illustrates another interesting change in the timing of contributions when the counters were removed. On the x-axis, we bin the user activity doing the long streaks into deciles. The y-axis represents the share of days in that decile where only one single contribution was made. We see a natural trend. Single contribution days are more common at the end of a long streak. But this tendency was more pronounced before the counters were removed. we infer that while counters were present, users would often log in and make a single contribution just to keep their streaks alive. We know that developers on GitHub are looking at each other's profiles. So did developers chase streaks of their friends? To investigate this hypothesis, we recreated the social networks of developers at different points in time. And each node in this network represents a developer. And since developers can follow each other on GitHub, we keep edges between developers if they follow each other. At a point in time, each developer has a streak statistic, and we labeled each node with their personal all-time longest streak. And here we ask, is streaking correlated in the network? So, are friends of a user with a high streak record likely to have high streak records themselves? To simplify, we call a user a streaker if the all-time longest streak before the design change was above a threshold 8, 15 or 32 days. In the second column, we calculate the conditional probability. What is the chance a streaking user has a streaking friend? We compare the observed probability that a streaker has a streaking neighbor against a null model. And in the null model, we randomly shuffle the streaking labels through the network, and we average the probability of streaking friends across many instances of the null model. And we see that while the streak counters were visible, streaking was correlated in the social network. And we ask, why is this the case? And we propose two possible reasons. The first one corresponds to sorting or homophily. Streakers might be more likely to be friends with other streakers. The second explanation is social influence. Seeing a friend streaking might inspire a user to also streak. And the natural experiment detects influence if a correlation drops after the change. So we now create the same network again and calculate the same conditional probability again using data in the year after the change. And here we only consider streaks which were made after the change. We now see that streaking correlation crashes after the design change, and that without having the counters, streaking is practically uncorrelated in the network. This is very strong evidence for influence, and that the counters were energizing people to compete with one another. If this led to more weekend work and single contribution days, this would be quite harmful. As a conclusion, we can confidently say that these gamified elements had an effect on the behavior of developers. The counters may have also encouraged counterproductive behavior. For example, we saw that users made contributions for many days without a break, including weekends and holidays. Single contribution days were more common towards the end of long streaks, suggesting that users just logged in to keep their streaks alive. We also saw that these users imitated the streaking behavior of their neighbors, showing the power of counters as a social signal. Perhaps the counter spread an unhealthy norm among developers. Our findings suggest that gamification should be deployed with care, and that the use of gamification can steer the behavior of software developers in unexpected and unwanted directions. That's all. Thank you very much for listening, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Hello again. Now we are lucky to have here two of the authors of the paper, Lucas Moldon, Johannes Watch, that are going to be present. Lucas will be answering the questions. I see that there are questions in the, up to 4 questions, so let's go for it. Let me just ask a very first question that we were commenting, that is the one related to the issue that gamification appears to be a positive question. But we wonder if this is always the case, because you mentioned that gamification should be deployed with care. So any experience in detecting when unexpected or unwanted directions are generated in software developers when gamification is not used in the right way?
So we are only focused in our work on the streak feature, and we have no experience in this work with any other gamified element than the streak feature. But I think our results show that the responses to gamification can be highly varied. So different individuals respond in different ways to gamification, and this has some factor that if you install or employ gamification, that this can result in a behavior which is some kind unexpected, and individuals have different intrinsic motivations and different personal inner values and personal different goals. And I think it's quite important to always keep in mind that people differently react to gamification, and in such a way it should be deployed with care. But we do not have any experience with other elements on other platforms.
Okay, thank you. Great. We have up to 4 questions right now from the audience. Let's go through the first one. You can see it in the chat. When the streak counter was still displayed, it was sometimes manipulated with automatically generated commits to make the profile more interesting for potential employers. Do you think that this has decreased? Somehow related, did you take into account in your analysis that some developers use their account as a human bot hybrid to create automated commits as well?
Well, that's a good question. So regarding the first part, yes. So we have found a source in the internet that before, so while the streak feature was present, users were generating commits to make their profile more interesting. You always have to keep in mind that there's the GitHub jobs platform, which is linked to the GitHub profile. We tried to do our best to filter for contributions which were modified after they were made. So if you have a large amount of commits with invalid timestamps, or you make contributions in the future, on the past, even before Git was founded, we tried to do our best to remove them. And interesting enough, at the time when we wrote our paper, there was a different paper which collected bots, or tried to detect a bots account on GitHub, and they shared a public database of bots online. And we used this database and compared it with our database of developers, and we found out that, well, with our filter criteria, the vast majority of these bots were filtered out in our analysis. And so we also think that people who are modifying their timestamps are also filtered out. Regarding the second question, did you take into account an analysis that some developers use their account as human bot hybrid to create automatic commits as well? Yes, we did. So if we have a high amount of contributions which is invalid or unlogical, we deleted them from the database. And the reason for this is it's not strictly cheating or something like that. There's, for example, this GitHub graffiti, which is still present today, where users create a high amount of contributions, fake contributions, just to have a nice logo or a nice image on their page, and we try to remove them as well.
Okay, thank you very much for your question, Marvin. I think also that the answer is very clear, Lucas. Let's move to the next one from Alexander Serebrenik. Would you expect some developers to be more susceptible to streaking than others? Streaking is a form of addiction.
Well, personally speaking, I'm quite sure that this is the case. As I said, our results suggest that people are different in different ways responding to gamification depending on their individual status. And I think that our results show that depending on your origin and different other aspects, you will respond to gamification in different ways. For example, in the paper, we saw that Chinese developers continued streaking on a similar level, while in the Western world, streaking decreased. And this is a quite complex question, how and why are individuals responding to gamification? But I'm 100% sure that there's a difference between individuals. And there's no uniform explanation how individuals react to gamification.
Thank you, Alexander. I think that following up, there is an interesting other from Barbara Bunova that is saying that continuing Alexander's question, it would be interesting to see if there would be a difference between genders. So any add information from this perspective?
Yes, indeed. Well, you have to know that this paper is based on my bachelor's thesis, and my bachelor's thesis was a bit more, it had more content, let's say it that way. And I also made an analysis regarding the gender and how female and male developers responded to gamification. This is unfortunately not part of the paper, not part of the presentation you just saw. But in my bachelor's thesis, I indeed concluded that female users before the design change, so with the streak feature being present, that female developers streaked on a lower level compared to male developers. And after the design change, both decreased, but the decrease in streaking for female developers was less significant, and male developers tended to respond more to this design change.
Okay, well, we have another question. We have 3 more minutes to go on. It is from Mika Mantilla. It is, what size of developers population is affected? 1% of developers, 10%, 50%?
That's a good question, and I think it's quite hard to answer this question. Well, I think the GitHub community nowadays has around 40 million developers. Our database includes 400,000 developers. It's hard to say if individuals have the same characteristics and the same distribution of the characteristics in our sample compared to the whole community. So I cannot really answer this question, but it might be interesting in the future for future research to see what share of individuals in different contexts is likely to respond to gamification. And yeah.
Okay, thank you. So there is an interesting comment from Johannes Watch, co-author, that is a link to the replication materials for the paper that includes a link to the extended bachelor thesis, including the gender analysis that was discussed before. Well, I think that there is a last comment from Ashkan saying that I miss how you deleted the contribution that were added by developers just to make a reputation. Or did you any comment for this question?
Yeah, sorry for the confusion. So we did not delete contributions which were made to increase reputation or something like that. We simply deleted contributions, and then users with a high amount of these invalid contributions where the timestamps clearly show that these timestamps were manipulated. So think about, you are creating a commit in a repository before this repository was created. Think about you're making a commit in the future. So let's say in 2030. Think about making a commit before Git was found. So all these impossible scenarios were detected by our scripts, and we removed them. And if a user had more of 100 of these contributions, we removed the user completely from our database. But we did not delete developers, or we did not have any measurement to find fake contributions which were made correctly but without a sense, or without really contributing a high quality code to a project.
Well, we have only 30 seconds. There is just a last time question. Please, in 20 seconds, Lucas, how common were those fake commits?
Not very common. I think we removed, at the end, after geolocating and everything, we removed 1% of the users with fake commits.
Okay, so thank you very much. I think that it has been a great session. Thanks for the question and for your fantastic answers, Lucas. And you know that there is now a space for continuing the discussion. You can join it, and we see you in the next session.